really special. I don't think you're going to be able to get this from any other podcast.
I'm not aware of anybody else who's ever discussed this particular topic.
Aspect of their life.
Yeah, really. This is kind of
usually this is the kind of thing that everyone just kind of goes, oh, this didn't happen. You sweep it under the rug. You just pretend it was like, back in your history. But so today, what are we covering here, William, today?
Well, what happened was I got audited by the IRS for cryptocurrencies.
Yep. And it's something that probably quite a few people have had happen to them. You're probably not the only one, but probably not as many people as are actually using cryptocurrencies.
Well, for sure. I mean, a lot of people are obviously using them, and I mean, lawyers are doing these cases, but I don't feel like there's a lot of expertise and a lot of people have had this experience. Really.
No, most people haven't been audited, especially if they've kind of just done normal trading or purchase, selling a house, that type of thing. But realize that once you get into cryptocurrencies, there's a little bit of a red flag put on your head, and there's a bit of a higher chance of getting audited. And we'll cover as well, there was a red flag kind of put onto your head, which caused you to get audited outside of just being in crypto. It was more than just being in crypto.
Well, I mean, it was a crypto problem, but
it was a crypto problem, but it was one that was definitely somewhat avoidable.
Yeah. So anyway,
so that's what we're talking about today. So if you've just joined us, feel free to ask any questions. By the way, this is going to be true Q&A. This is a legitimate opportunity for you people to ask about what it's like to get audited, the entire process.
So Paul's got the live stream up on his screen so he can see the questions you type into YouTube.
Yep.
So
there's a great opportunity. You're not going to get another opportunity like this for the most part that I'm aware of. No one really wants to share their experience with getting audited by the IRS and what it feels like, what you have to do and what you have to deal with and how long it takes. And then of course, most importantly, how do you pass it? That's an important thing. We know we didn't do this in the midst of the audit process happening. The audit process is now kind of behind you, and so we can kind of talk about it. And so you got to thank William. It was actually his idea to do this, to share the experience. And I said, number one thing I said is, are you sure?
Most people don't want to talk about their personal finances. And to be honest, the audit, I heard that it's closed, but I haven't received the final report yet.
Got it.
So I don't want to like name names or do anything that would be still sketch, but I think there's enough that has happened, that has transpired, that I feel confident in.
Right. And it was definitely a positive state of the audit, or what they would call an investigation and whatnot. So okay, great. Let's get started into this. All right. So let's rewind back.
2017.
2017. What did you first hear about the need for you to now have to deal with this entire process?
Well, let's kind of back it up. Actually, 2014 when I first got involved in crypto, or even 2013. Shoot, it was, I think, the first year I had any crypto. Mm-hmm. I never actually bothered putting any of that stuff on my tax return. So that's just kind of step one. So
fair mistake.
In 2013, we didn't even know, like the IRS hadn't even declared whether they thought cryptocurrency was taxable at all.
Correct.
So we didn't know what to do. And then they said it was taxable, but I kind of felt like, okay, well, the price peaked at $1,000, and ever since then it was kind of going downhill. Mm-hmm. So I felt like every time I sell, I'm losing money. So all I have are losses. So I don't owe them any money. I'm not capturing as much loss as I could, but I don't owe them any money. So at that point, I don't know how to file it. I don't know how to do the paperwork. No one ever taught me. There's no like class online on how to do crypto. So I just didn't bother until 2017, which is the first year the price started to go back up. And it's like, okay, now I have gains and now I need to pay tax.
Right.
So I hired somebody to do my taxes for me. I'm not going to say who, but they did my taxes for me. They prepared the cryptocurrency taxes, submitted it to the IRS, and then sent me my copy of my tax return that they had just submitted.
Got it. Now, in the process of doing that, let's rewind. In the process of doing it, what did you actually have to provide this
to the CPA
accountant, to the CPA in order for them to properly file your taxes?
So in order for them to do it, I basically took my exports out of Edge.
Got it. Okay.
And then I put those into a software called Bitcoin.tax.
Okay. A little plug for Bitcoin.tax. He had mentioned him.
Yeah.
A little plug. At least you know that it was used, whether it was a great or bad app. It's yet to be determined.
It was the one that I saw that was available and it worked. And I got all the stuff shoved into there. And then
when you shoved it in there, I remember we've had discussions in the past. It wasn't like an automatic take.
We'll talk about Bitcoin.tax in a bit if we don't get any questions.
Got it. Okay.
Oh my goodness. Sure. That was not necessarily, let's say, the best experience in my life.
Fair enough.
But I got it all in. I got the report and it calculated a number, a capital gains number. Mm-hmm. And then it reports out the actual tax forms. Like Bitcoin.tax actually prepares the tax forms.
Got it. These
So-
are separate from the tax forms you have to file just as a regular
Oh, yeah.
individual having income or
So yeah,
if
you
have
still need to
property.
do your 1099 and your Schedule C if you're self-employed and all
Right,
that other
right.
stuff, right? You still need to do like the regular income tax. It just does the capital gains.
Gain and loss tax
Report,
form.
right.
There's a name for that. I can't recall the exact
It's like
name.
86 something or
Right,
other.
exactly. IRS has a bunch of
But it
four-
attaches to
four
like your
characters.
Schedule D anyway.
Perfect. Okay, so that exact tax form is what was generated by the
Tax software. Yeah. So what I did is I gave the Bitcoin.tax has a mode where you can actually give the email address of your accountant, and then it will let them log in, and then they can access your reports.
Perfect.
So that's what I did. I gave the CPA access to my Bitcoin.tax software, plus, the normal stuff you give them, like your W-2s and your pay stubs and all that sort of thing. And then they prepared the tax packet, and then they sent it off to the IRS.
Correct.
Except for one little problem. They must have picked somebody else's numbers, because the Bitcoin.tax calculation had a capital gain, because I get paid and then I sell, and I get paid and I sell, and sometimes I'll hold on to it for a couple of weeks before I sell. And so with all the ramp up, the crazy price gains in 2017, we went from like, was it like
less than $1,000?
$1,000 up to 20,000, right?
Right.
So I made some pretty nice gains, but they were in the thousands of dollars, right? I had my capital gain for that year. The taxable income was like, say, 5,000, 6,000. I don't remember exactly. But he reported $3 million capital gains.
Geez, so
on
we're
my
looking,
tax
at, we're looking at multiple orders of magnitude too high of a reported taxable
Now,
gains.
I
that you
don't
actually-
know who on earth has $3 million of capital gains. Whoever that person is, they are happy camper.
But
They're not me. They're not me.
because they reported a few thousand of capital gains. Although they might not be a happy camper if they get
Well,
if they now get
so somehow or
audited.
other the CPA must have switched numbers. Or something. That's my theory. The CPA never admitted to doing anything. He's just like, well, we'll get it fixed, right? We'll send them an amended tax return that has the correct numbers on it. They'll accept those, and then you'll be good to go.
All right.
Well, as you can imagine, the IRS first receives an income saying, oh, you made $3 million in cryptocurrency. And then the next thing they receive a month later is another tax return saying, oh, never mind, it was only 5,000.
Right.
Just for the sake of argument, I'm not telling the real numbers, but it's right around there. They're like, well, we're sending your tax return for examination. So that's what I get. I get a nice little letter saying they're sending my tax return for examination.
And now, roughly when was this? This is, once again, you had the original crypto that you'd kind of got into 2013, 2014, 2017, the big ramp up.
Yeah.
And it was for the year of 2017 that you submitted tax at early
so
2018?
figure October 2018.
October 2018.
That's the final deadline, because I did a prepayment, and then you kind of have to have a little while to get your paperwork together, and then October is like the final deadline, right?
Right.
So October 2018 is when I submitted the amended, or November probably was the amended one, right?
Right.
And then I think January, February is when this letter came in saying,
So January, February of 2019.
yeah,
Got it. So that's about a year ago.
about a
Almost
year
exactly
ago. About a year ago, I got the letter. And they also sent me another letter saying, oh, by the way, you owe us $1 million in taxes.
Right, because you've got a whole bunch of gains, and therefore yes.
Yeah.
With those gains there come a whole bunch of taxes.
Right. So the question is, do I owe those taxes or not? And the answer is, well, we're going to examine them to figure out what the situation is. And then that'll either determine if you owe us like nothing because I paid it, or $1 million because I didn't pay it.
Right, exactly. So we're looking at early 2019, a year ago, you get this letter. What are next steps for someone that effectively receives this letter?
So in my case, the letter was actually a good thing, because what it meant was they're going to look at this, figure out what the real situation is, and then make it so I don't owe.
You know, $1 million. Right.
So it's actually an audit in my favor, right? Because of the huge magnitude of the mistake that was made.
Right.
The audit is actually going to fix it. So I got like what's supposed to really happen.
Now, when normally in a refile, that effectively fixes it as well. And frequently people refile and they don't get an audit.
Well, yeah, they
just
refile, the IRS accepts the refile, and it's
refile.
game over, right?
And you're just simply done.
Yeah,
And
but
so in that case, you submitted the refile,
And
but
they
didn't
didn't
just
accept
outright
it.
accept it.
Yeah, they actually needed to like examine it.
Right.
They don't call it, the IRS, by the way, never calls an audit. They call it an examination.
Got it. Similar words and synonyms and whatnot, but okay. So they file. And
So the
request
letter
an
basically
examination.
said we're sending it to examinations, but they didn't give me like a date or anything to do. They're just saying we're sending it over.
And that's it. So really, you're waiting for them to do something else at that point.
So they have, some number of examiners who can do this, right? And they're busy. They've got lots of stuff on their plate. So it was about another 3 or 4 months before the actual examiner that they assigned to me sent me a letter saying, hey, it's me. I'm the examiner on your case. Now we're going to go ahead and look at your stuff.
Got it.
So she gave me 2 weeks to go ahead and reply to her basically and kind of get that initial meeting scheduled. So I didn't actually schedule the meeting myself. Instead, I called the new CPA that I hired to replace the guy who messed up.
Right.
And asked him for his advice. And I called around and looked at some things. Bitcoin.tax actually had a podcast that I'd listened to. And in that podcast, they had interviewed a bunch of different lawyers. And some of them had done crypto audits before.
Got it. So this is a CPA or a lawyer? So you're working with a new CPA, obviously.
I'm working with a new CPA. So I asked for him for his recommendations. I go on the podcast. I listen to some of the people they talk to. I call a couple people and eventually settle on a lawyer that I found through the podcast, actually.
And this is a lawyer that's experienced with crypto specifically.
Right. Like he's done audits before for other people.
Got it.
So he's not new to this.
Is it someone that in the future you would recommend for other people?
So I'll name, this is the one name I'm going to say in this whole thing, Alex Kugelman.
Got it.
And he was super professional. Like I was very happy with his, like he was spot on. Like he was very communicative. He was always available. Like I felt like he was really the consummate professional lawyer. Like just really on top of his game.
So we're giving kudos for Alex Kugelman?
Kugelman.
Alex Kugelman, great job working with William, getting him out of a bind. And so if you do get audited, there's at least one name for you. I'm not saying that we're 100% recommending you're not going to have any problems, but there's one name to at least look into.
So he sent me his terms. He's not a cheap lawyer, I'll put it that way. But given the magnitude of the taxes that were theoretically owed if they didn't accept the audit correctly, I was kind of like, I'm willing to pay this very, very expensive lawyer for the sake of, getting out of this other very, very expensive situation. Hot water, right? So I don't want to. I want the truth to come out. I don't want to get So anyway,
don't get screwed in one way.
Yeah. So hired him. And he called the auditor, and I never really once had to speak to the auditor.
Yeah, once you have a lawyer, pretty much they're shielding you from the entity that's going after you.
Right. So he talks to the IRS. The IRS talks to him. So it was a lot of, in the next several months were basically like, I'd get an email from the lawyer saying, I need X, Y, and Z document. They're asking to see this. I'd prepare the document. I need a report of like what was happening in this year. I'd upload it to the shared drive. He'd send it off to the lawyer of the IRS. She'd look at it. She'd come back with more questions. He'd ask me for more documents, and it'd be back and forth like this game of telephone with him in the middle. So I kind of, towards the end, my wife and I were getting, after we paid our second lawyer bill, and we're like, oh man, like if we had not hired a lawyer, we would be getting rid of one of our student loans by now.
Yeah, geez. The lawyer being the worst. In a way, the worst expense in the end. Once you pass an audit, that's the one expense that you're kind of still left with. Is the legal expense. So
because that's on you, right? You don't necessarily need a lawyer. You could just go meet the auditor in person and just give them directly whatever they're asking for.
Did you ever get an idea at the point in communication with a lawyer of what he was doing that was unique and in interfacing with the IRS? Obviously, aside from shuttling of information, like where was he looking out for you or making suggestions that you wouldn't have known as a non-professionally trained lawyer?
So I think because I went through the crypto tax podcast and I've been reading a lot of documents and stuff, I'm pretty well versed on what's going on. Mm-hmm. And also using the Bitcoin.tax software and the crazy stuff I did there, like I felt like I was in a pretty good place that I maybe didn't need a lawyer, maybe. But I feel like he knew the terminology and the ways of responding and just sort of like the correct protocol for dealing with the IRS in a way that made things easy on them.
Right. Makes them happy, makes them go a little bit smoother and faster.
Exactly. So I feel like just by him being the guy that knew how to deal with what they were asking in the terms that they were asking it meant that when he came to me with requests, like he knew what to ask for and then whether or not that would be a problem and whether like, okay, we won't share that with them, but we'll share this because, like they don't need to see that. That's not what they asked for. So we don't have to include that.
I've always been, that's the part that I'm curious about is when can you actually push back on them and say, you don't need to know that. You don't need to know that. Even if they were to ask for something, you say, hey, you're auditing this specific thing. Why did you ask for X, Y, and Z when all you need is A, B, and C? I'm curious if lawyers ever do push back on information and get away with it and actually alleviate someone from having to dig up more records than they really are really necessary.
So I'll go into specifics here. So his objective was to keep the audit confined to the year 2017.
Got it.
So
got it.
anything dealing with prior years, he wanted to know the information as himself because he wanted to know where we stood, right?
Right.
But he's like, we're just going to give them the relevant information for the year because his idea was to keep the examination scoped to where we needed it to be.
So that's an interesting question because in my understanding of crypto and taxes, even if you're being audited for a specific year, it's really tough based on investments that may have happened in prior years. How do you
Right.
keep that scoped where you can say that, for example, you bought a Bitcoin in 2014 and you sold half of it in 2016 and then sold the other half of it in 2017, which is the year that you actually care about.
Right, right.
So what kind of information were you, in such an example, what kind of information were you able to exclude from sharing with the IRS in order to keep things at scope for just
So in the end,
2017?
the funny thing is, in the end, we gave them everything.
Okay, you pretty much just have to because it's. I mean, it is tough in that sense
Right,
because
right.
it's so chain linked. It's almost like a little
Right.
blockchain of
So
information.
So what happened was, so when you sell money in 2017, is that the new crypto you just got in 2017, or is it the old from like
Right.
2013? What did I ever
Exactly.
sell my 2013 coins, or do I still have them? And that's relevant because the 2013 coins are an awful lot cheaper, and therefore would have an awful lot more gains than the newer coins.
Exactly.
So he wanted to keep the audit scope to the single year that it was. In the end, the examiner wanted to see that stuff, and I had no problem sharing that. So we went ahead and actually I prepared everything. And I had to do that anyway just to figure out what my gains were. So I just gave them everything. And he was able to pass that along. But she didn't open audit or open examination on the earlier years.
I see. The open examination was
Is like
specifically for 2017, but with information necessary from
right
prior years.
with information
just
from prior years. Yeah,
just to understand and be able to properly examine 2017.
exactly. So
was it a spot check? Like, okay, well, you did something in 2017. Can you give me that transaction 2014, 15, or 16 relative to it? Or is it just give us everything?
well,
from
I gave her the
2014?
CSVs for the whole everything that I've ever done. So they have every single crypto transaction I've ever done.
Got it. So with respect to giving them everything or the information, now that information can be fairly bare, or it can actually be very rich as far as
we gave them the best that we had, actually, the richest. So I actually gave them the Airbit CSV exports.
Okay.
I gave them the spreadsheets that were calculated. So before I even do this, I need to explain the crazy Bitcoin.tax thing.
Got it. Let's go into Bitcoin.tax.
Okay, so Bitcoin.tax has this little problem where they need you to separate out your trades, your incomes, and your spends into 3 separate tabs. You can't upload all that at once.
That's crazy.
It's
Because from the viewpoint of calculating capital gains, you actually don't care of the difference between a trade and an income and a
right.
spend. They're all the same.
Yeah, they're all the same. So anyway,
If anyone challenges what I'm saying, because I've heard this from multiple accountants, so I'm not an accountant, I'm definitely not a financial advisor accountant, but this is what I've heard from multiple accountants. They're all effectively the same.
yeah, it's just, do I have a capital gain or a loss? Which is,
Yeah.
if I dispose of Bitcoin, whether it was for a trade or whether it was for a sell, it doesn't matter.
Or buying a cup of coffee.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
theory, it's all potentially capital gains and losses. It's a
Yeah.
dispose of an asset versus acquiring of
Yeah.
an asset. Why have to bucket them into these
The
three?
fact that they have 3 tabs is the worst thing about Bitcoin.tax, and I would not recommend their software for that single reason. Okay, but I'm using it, and I've got the system workaround. So what I did is
Got
I
it.
wrote a piece of software because I'm Edge's developer, right?
Yep.
So I can write
You can write software.
I would not share this software with anybody because it's kind of awful, like command line stuff, but it does work. And anyway, it takes the Edge CSVs, combines all the Edge CSVs together into one giant file, and then it it splits it out by year. So then I have everything from all 5 Bitcoin wallets, because I have the testing one and the personal one,
Some other ones, yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
Combines them all.
splits it all out. And then I have everything that happened in 2017, everything in 2016, everything in 2015.
Got
And
it,
then it has a way where I can annotate those. So say this one was a sell, this
Right.
one was a buy, this one was a gift, this one was a transfer. Therefore, it doesn't count because the money shows up in the exchange
No,
on the other
that's
side.
actually the most important thing to
Right.
tag. That's
Getting,
the one
getting
non-taxable
all,
event.
getting all those transfers taken out so that they don't count as like selling, because this wasn't a taxable event. It was just moving from place to place.
Got it.
And then it combines all that information and then produces the final reports in the format that Bitcoin.tax needs. And I just upload those and I'm done.
Got it. Now, what would happen? Like, what would your lawyer say if you said, I've got this tax software, kind of sucks, and instead of bucketing into the trades versus dispose versus income, you literally just said everything was a trade?
That, from the IRS's point of view, that's all it is anyway. On the
So-
final report, it doesn't even matter.
So in a way, would this be a nugget suggestion for people that are using Bitcoin.tax? Purely, obviously, income is a very different tax bracket, right? You have different sources of information about your income tax. But from the viewpoint of capital gains and losses, could someone that might currently be
the
using
thing is, their
Bitcoin.tax?
trade tab always says what asset was sold for what other asset.
Got it. So if you disposed of it, you'd assume that the other asset's like fiat.
Yeah.
All the time, even though it might have been something else.
Yeah, if I
like
bought a
like-
coffee, there's no way to enter that information into their trade tab because it has different columns.
So in a way, you could still consider a trade as like everything is fiat. So if I went from Bitcoin to Ether, it really went Bitcoin to dollars to Ether.
Yeah,
And
you
so
can jam it in. But it's just not. I wouldn't say that would be a user friendly way to do it. You have to munge Edge's data into that format anyway.
got it.
Yeah, I just don't feel like it was a very user friendly software, or very well designed for anything that any human would ever.
But I think back then there wasn't a lot of options.
There wasn't a lot of options.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm happy it existed because it did the capital gains calculation, but I'm just not happy with the way you enter data.
Right. And
And you're in talks with other people who may partner with us, other tax software who may not suck in this way.
Exactly. Not to overly diverge into a tangent, we are talking with various other partners to integrate tax calculation software directly inside of Edge. So instead of having to deal with exactly what William had to deal with exporting a CSV file and then writing custom software on a command line for you to take that CSV file and munge it into a format that some tax software can accept. Instead, you just simply in the app, tap a few buttons. You might have to kind of verify an email with a third party, but then it automatically sends your transaction information to tax software, which can then go and create these forms for reporting to the IRS.
Yeah.
So that will be much more streamlined for people going forward, hopefully in future tax years. But this is 2017. A lot of companies weren't built yet that are available now. And a lot of people didn't realize the need as well.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of people are like, doing like what you'd mentioned. Well, maybe I just won't file anything because I might get losses. It's been slow. And maybe a lot of people that got in 2017 aren't doing anything because they've also experienced just losses.
Yeah.
Right. Into the 2018, 2019.
But I would suggest if you can file your taxes, do file your taxes, even if you have losses, because then you can recapture those losses in future years and reduce your tax bill. So
Exactly. And if anything, it's nice to start tracking as soon as you get in because everything's relative to the point when you get in.
Well, what that meant too was in 2018, I in order to get my taxes done, I actually ended up, the 2017 numbers weren't quite right. So as part of this whole process, I had to redo everything and really like dot the I's, cross the T's and get everything to line up perfectly. Mm-hmm. And in that huge process, it was like 4 days nonstop, like morning, noon and night.
Jeez. Of just doing like exports and
working on the software, putting the data in, finding more glitches, going through systematically identifying and fixing those glitches and just because I had to reconcile 2013 to 2018.
Jeez. Yeah. Pretty much when you start because
every crypto transaction I've ever done, which is thousands because I get paid in it. So it's
right. Yeah.
So I would suggest for your sake, do it now and not wait and put it all off for the future.
Pretty much when it starts.
Because then you can remember what's going on too.
And so we diverged a little bit when we started talking about Bitcoin.tax.
So I gave them the raw CSVs from Edge, the finished CSVs that went into the tax software and the output of the tax software.
Is what you effectively gave the lawyer.
Gave the auditor.
To the IRS.
Yeah.
And now those CSVs, without the tax software, are you also, because like we had mentioned, the only thing that really matters to the IRS is whether you dispose or acquire an asset.
Yeah.
But from the viewpoint of the transfer, how do you mark that? Is that marked basically by the fact that the Bitcoin.tax software knows that something was a transfer?
So I don't upload transfers to Bitcoin.tax. My software's whole purpose really was fundamentally to get rid of the transfers.
I see. So you're giving them only the taxable information.
Yeah.
Now, did you have any transactions on other services, any other exchanges, and how did you kind of manage the fact that you were transferring between those?
Right.
And they have a different format.
Right.
That
So
gets exported from exchanges.
So Kraken, I used Kraken in 2017. I don't use them anymore, but at the time I used them.
Okay.
All they have is wire transfers, which are like really expensive.
Yeah, they are.
So anyway, I had Kraken, and Kraken imports directly into Bitcoin.tax. So if you just use exchanges, I guess it works really nice.
Right. Yep.
And then Kraken doesn't show the transfers, or the import doesn't include them. So it's like,
Oh, really? So they actually exclude the transfers into and out of your account.
Yeah.
When they do the export into Bitcoin.tax.
Yeah. So really, the wallet software Edge shows $1,000 leaving.
Right.
Kraken shows $1,000 coming in, but the Bitcoin.tax doesn't include that. It's just like, okay, you sold it on this date.
It's assuming that when it leaves Kraken, that it's not actually leaving your possession, even though technically it could have been. So if someone like took their Kraken account and then sent money from Kraken to go buy something, or sent it to exchange for a service, or sold some crypto,
they don't include the transfer.
They don't include that.
Yeah.
They don't include that as part of the.
Yeah. So they assume if
transaction.
you withdraw from Kraken, that it's going to your personal wallet.
To your own personal wallet, right?
They just assume that, and they have no way of like checking.
Yeah, they can't verify that because it's just simply an address.
Which was actually a problem because I had used Coinbase to do a Coinbase merchant solution. Somebody, I had to buy something from Overstock, and they used Coinbase, right?
Right.
And so that's technically upload money to Coinbase followed by a sell on Coinbase, but they didn't import it into the trades tab. It's just the transaction got dropped. So that was one thing they had to reconcile by hand, is that.
I see. Because there was no intermediary wallet that you sent it to first. You went directly out of an exchange.
Yeah.
And then you effectively disposed of it because
It was a taxable event
product
that their software stupidly dropped because it's like, well, it must be a transfer.
Yeah, he must have been sending it to himself because that's what everyone does with an exchange.
Yeah, right.
You deposit money into it and you withdraw money from it.
Nobody buys things with crypto, so therefore, yeah. So anyway, that I had to manually put a fix up into my CSV to like, anyway, so yeah.
Got it. Okay, so uploaded everything, sent the CSVs from Edge, all of the exports from Bitcoin.tax from the exchanges. You'd also marked all the transfers within Edge, so that way those don't get uploaded.
Well, yeah.
Those don't get uploaded to Bitcoin.tax and therefore don't get mentioned to the IRS, because it's true. That's a non-taxable event. It's going from one pocket to another, one wallet to an exchange.
But actually that ended up being important.
No, it's most important.
Oh yeah. But I also want to make another point too, is that the IRS has two modes of operating. One is LIFO. So the latest thing you get in, or no, sorry, FIFO. So the first money you receive is the first one you sell. So if I receive a Bitcoin in 2013 and then sell, and then receive another in 2014 and then sell in 2017, I'm always selling the 2013.
The earliest
and that's
one,
the
right.
default.
Default if you don't claim anything else.
If you don't do anything special, that's the default, and they won't quibble with that.
Right.
Now, in my case, since I'm getting paid and then I sell the next day, I always want to be saying I'm selling the one I just received, the last in, first out, which is not what the IRS normally likes.
Right.
And they actually, in their FAQ, I think it's FAQ 37 on their cryptocurrency FAQ, the IRS actually says you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to specifically identify which coins are which, but you have to be able to show in your records every transfer and every event that would move, so that we know that those coins you say they are the coins you say
actually coins, correct.
Yeah. And so because my records were so detailed, and because they actually included the transfers out of Edge in the CSVs,
right,
we were actually able to defend that accounting practice, and they accepted it.
Got it.
So really having that detailed record with like the actual raw transaction logs from the Bitcoin wallet with the transaction IDs and everything was what saved us and actually allowed us to consider that to be that form of accounting.
Got it. And you were able to specify LIFO, and you're continuing to do LIFO to this point, or are you looking at some of the more flexible methods? To my understanding, some software will actually pick
the most optimal
bucket.
Yeah.
And decide dynamically and actually hold in the software all the different buckets that you've acquired price buckets that you've acquired crypto, and effectively sell to optimize tax.
Right. You can actually do that, be picky about which ones you sold when to minimize your tax bill. I think I'm going to stick with LIFO because it actually is, in most cases, for me at least, the way I do my life, the optimal.
Got it. And I think it's probably true for most people with crypto, because crypto tends to trend upward. And then your last coins always, your most recently tend to be worth the least as far as, and have least amount of taxable gain than your oldest.
Yeah.
Right. For assets that are trending downward, it's the opposite case. And so LIFO probably is their simplest, unless you really want to get fully optimized every single year.
And the tax software, Bitcoin.tax, will do that. And the way it handles the other thing you were saying is that at the end of every year, it gives a report of your remaining coins. So it says, whatever you did this year, here's what's left. So you have half a Bitcoin at this basis, a quarter of a Bitcoin at that basis. And then that's your input to the next year.
Exactly.
So as long as you have that input, you can switch from year to year to year. If you're within a specific identification, like where you can justify that by having all those detailed records they need.
Got it. Now, a question I have is, if someone was doing, FIFO, and then if they were to switch to LIFO, what's that process going to even look like? Is that basically refiling from the very beginning?
No. So what happens is every year you file, you're done, right? And then you have your remaining coins. So I told the IRS I sold these coins and that I kept these other ones. Well, now at the end of the year, there's my report. I have a half a Bitcoin that I acquired at
certain
10,000.
price. Right.
I know that I have another quarter of a Bitcoin that I acquired at $300,
Right.
whatever, different coins I have at different prices. And that's your input. And then that next year you can use if you want to do specific identification.
I see. You can, but if you continue to do LIFO, then you also have not just the price, but when you got it.
Yeah.
LIFO or FIFO is a sequential
So
choice.
That output from that previous year is your starting point for the next year. And so if within that year you can do LIFO or FIFO or whatever, but those coins that you have at the beginning of the year, those are the oldest coins.
I see. Got it. So you can actually switch back and forth between FIFO and LIFO between years? I assume they don't like that.
No, they wouldn't. But
will they accept it?
Well, the question is, do you have enough information, like TXIDs, wallet data dumps, to justify and defend a specific identification? Because really there's only two modes. They don't have like LIFO and FIFO. They have specific identification.
Oh, I see.
And
FIFO. And so LIFO is just a form of specific identification,
exactly.
Which makes sense because really specific identification can implement anything.
Right.
It can implement FIFO, it can implement LIFO, but
if you want to do specific identification, you have a much higher documentation burden that they require.
Right, and that's entirely fair. Okay, so you did specific identification, but with your calculation being as simple as, well, not simple, but the concept is LIFO.
Yeah.
And since you're doing that at any point in time, you have enough of the documentation necessary, and you've been keeping it because it was required for you to switch to something more optimized on any year that you choose to do so.
I think so. Yeah, again, I'm not a lawyer, but that was what they did. That's what they looked at. That's what they accepted. So I'm assuming that that's the case. I mean,
got it. Okay, all right. So next phase in this, you submitted everything. What's now the process even feel like from there after you've done the submission?
Yeah, just lots of requests for information.
Got it.
The auditor brought in a consultant from back east.
Okay.
Who was more of a crypto expert. Obviously, I had my
the IRS auditor. You mean
the IRS auditor actually brought in an expert to help.
I wonder how much that person was paid. Can I be an expert? Cool.
Anyway, so obviously they were going through things with a pretty fine tooth comb, and at the end they said, that things add up. Your story makes sense, right? Okay. You clearly don't have $3 million of capital gains, right?
Got it.
You have more like the number you said. They adjusted the numbers a little bit on their end.
I see. And what does time frame look like for all this? So this was, it was 2017 taxable year. 2018, October 2018, which is the deadline to file.
Right, filed.
For 2017.
Right around the deadline.
You got in January, was it January 2019 or February 2019? You got the letter.
Early 2019.
Right, you got the letter, and now you've got to go.
So say April, June.
Get a lawyer.
Whatever, I got the auditor assigned.
And then you then hired a lawyer around what time frame?
Right, like the next day.
Right, next day, great. And then so what does it look like after that? So
then it was several months, and then I think I got the final exam report, at least the initial final exam report in December.
In December, so like a half a year.
Yeah.
So it was a half a year of you working with your lawyer as a kind of intermediary with the IRS to submit documents, request more documents, submit more documents, back and forth. About how many hours is the lawyer kind of billing for that whole process?
Shoot.
Without exposing how much it costs, roughly.
Just like 15 hours, 20 hours, something like that.
At a time, or no, total for the entire audit?
Yeah, 20. Say it's in the range of 20 hours that the lawyer spent on my case. I don't have the final bill.
Got it, but in the mid 10 figures.
Yeah.
Depending on the complexity of your
10, 15 hours maybe. So then you multiply that by several $100 an hour. And
you know how much you're paying. Yeah. That's easily gone, which is in a way for some people in this world, that is their taxes that they pay.
That is more than the audit is worth, right?
Yeah.
If your audit's like they're quibbling over, do I owe, $10,000 in taxes versus, $5,000 in taxes? Your lawyer bill may be more than the difference.
That. Which is maybe where they get you. They just say, well, then you just pay the taxes. You don't have to pay a lawyer.
Well, I mean, really,
which sucks.
Realistically,
that's kind of how the legal system works. Is if you can't afford the lawyer, you just pay.
Well, realistically, though, I mean, like I said, the lawyer was doing a lot of shuttling back and forth, trying to contain the scope, but in the end, we gave them all the information. And so it didn't end up containing the scope that much. But I felt like if I had simply talked directly to the examiner and given her what she asked for, like this CSV, that CSV, all the data dumps and everything, that she might have still come to the same conclusions.
Right.
It's quite possible.
So if I had to ask, say you got audited in 2021, same thing, crypto transactions, do it yourself.
I might consider doing it myself, but again, like I said, the risk was so high with the thing. I was not willing to take that risk.
Right, like
given the cost of failure, I was like, that's life destroying right there. So
right. So if there wasn't that type of a risk, where it wasn't because you had accidentally submitted a tax return that had millions of dollars of gains, instead it was they just suddenly tried to choose to audit you this year.
Yeah.
Right, based on your normal numbers.
Then I probably wouldn't in that situation worry about it as much.
Yeah, just deal with it yourself.
But I'd say if you're in a situation where you're like really worried about it, then for sure hire Alex.
Yeah, nope, you got a professional
that's my ringing endorsement for
Yeah,
Do
great job,
we have
Alex.
any questions from our YouTube stream?
We have a few comments, but not necessarily any questions so far. One person, Salar Telly, where I live, only few people know about crypto, so there's no laws, I guess, or taxes on them. Where do you live, Salar? I'm not entirely sure, but I presume that will probably change over the coming years. Although it's true that there are many countries where there are no capital gains on crypto.
Well, that's nice.
So there may be tax laws with respect to it just simply being money, and when you buy something when you earn crypto, it's simply money and you have an income tax.
Yeah.
But from the viewpoint of capital gains, there are some countries where there simply are no capital gains. I think maybe even Germany is one of them. Ooh. I can't recall. But and there might be countries where there's no capital gains after a certain period of time if you hold it long enough. And so that is definitely a benefit for people that are outside of the U.S. and positive jurisdictions. But in other places, most places do have some form of taxes on gains. But at the same time, there's also the flip side. So one of the benefits also, even if you think that you don't owe any money to the IRS, in calculating your capital gains, is you might have a benefit in the sense you could have a capital loss. And if you have a loss, go ahead and take it. Go ahead and take it. That's less money you give to the government, and I'm all for that. But cool. All right. This has been great. This is super informative. I learned quite a few things. Thanks for tuning in. Usually we'll close with, we haven't even done the word of the day.
We got to say what the word of the day.
So word of the day. This is the official word of
the day is examination, not audit, but examination, because that's what they call it.
Exactly. So when you get a little envelope or a large envelope in the mail.
No, it's a little right.
It's a little envelope in the mail, and it has the word examination. It comes from the IRS. That's called an audit. That's what everyone else in the world calls an audit. But they like having their long words and whatnot and pretend they're smart. But right, word of the day. So therefore, in case you don't recall, in order for you to win $20 worth of Bitcoin, look for the hashtag Edge word of the day. And we've sent out a few tweets during the week. You have to have retweeted that earlier in the week and reply to it with a QR code of your Bitcoin wallet in Edge. And if you're the first one to correctly have the word of the day, and you actually did retweet our earlier tweet this week announcing the word of the day competition, then we'll send you $20. So go ahead and do that, and we'll be looking for that and send a few people, or a person, $20 in Bitcoin. Cool. All right. And usually we end with some events and what we're headed to. So Jessica, or Painful Human on Twitter, will be headed to a conference by Tone Vase, Unconfiscatable Bitcoin Conference in Vegas. And that's happening later this month in mid-February. I want to say around like the 21st-ish of the month. Sorry if I got the date wrong. I don't have it in front of me. So definitely catch her there. She'll be in the pinball tournament and at the steak dinner and just wandering around the conference. And as well, some of us on the team, including myself, will be at Bitcoin 2020 in San Francisco next month, end of March. So hope to catch you guys over at those events. And until then, we'll catch you next week. And remember,
not your keys, not your coins, and not your data if you need to do a report.
Exactly. Hold your data so that you can control it in case you need to report it to someone else. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Talk to you next week.